Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to Solutions Watch. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and on a deprogramming note, I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but as I hope you know by now, there will not be an edition of New World next week, this week, as James Pilato is taking a much-needed week off, but I will be posting up an interview later this week that was conducted with me by Reality Check Radio in New Zealand on the subject of CBDCs that I think is worth your time and attention. And today, I have a special offering for you, the second Solutions Watch episode of the week, because you can never have enough Solutions Watch. And this will be on a subject that I think will be near and dear to the hearts of many Corbett Report listeners, or at least one that should be familiar to longtime Corbett Report listeners. That is the issue of the water fluoridation that is taking place, for example, in the United States, elsewhere around the world, but primarily, we're going to be focusing today on the United States, which should be a topic familiar, as I say, to long-term listeners. If you type fluoride into the Corbett Report search engine, you will find the various reports that I have filed on this subject over the years, including, back in March of 2018, a conversation that I conducted with Dr. Michael Connett of the Fluoride Action Network on a lawsuit that was proceeding at that time. Well, here we are in 2024, and that lawsuit, well, is still awaiting judgment anyway. In order to get the details of that, today we're going to be talking not to Dr. Michael Connett, we're going to be talking to Michael Connett's son, Michael Connett, who happens to be a lawyer and, in fact, the lead attorney on the fluoride lawsuit, which, for the record and formally speaking, is Food and Water Watch et al., v. United States Environmental Protection Agency et al., and I will link up the actual court page for that for those who are interested, as well as relevant resources and documents and things about this fluoride lawsuit. But let's bring him on the program. Michael Connett, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, James. It's good to be with you.
Excellent. So let's start with a little bit of background and introduction, since this is your first time on the program. Tell us about yourself and how you came to be involved in the so-called fluoride lawsuit.
Well, if we go back to the beginning, as you have indicated, my father, who's an environmental scientist, became involved with the fluoride issue back in the late 1990s, when our town in Canton, New York, was deciding whether to stop adding fluoride chemicals to the water. And my dad and my mother, who's also an environmental researcher, began looking into the issue, and I eventually started looking into it as well and helped co-found the Fluoride Action Network in 2000 and have been investigating the issues for the most part since that time. And I went to law school in 2008, and then after law school, I became a toxic tort attorney representing people affected by various toxic chemicals, and then filed this lawsuit on fluoride chemicals in drinking water against the EPA. And we filed that back in April of 2017. And about 8 years later, here we are, and we are currently awaiting the judgment of the court.
You know, this is completely irrelevant to our conversation, but just out of my own curiosity, what other types of toxic substances have you taken to court?
So I have worked on chemicals in the workplace, like organic solvents, industrial solvents, and heavy metals that are linked to birth defects. So I've represented families whose children have suffered birth defects, which we believe are connected to the parents' work in certain chemical industries, like the semiconductor industry or the aerospace industry. I've also represented people impacted by asbestos exposures, among others.
Okay, fascinating stuff. I would love to talk to you for hours about what you know on these subjects, but let's stick to the subject for today, the water fluoridation and the fluoride lawsuit. As I say, this should be familiar to my regular listeners from my previous conversation with your father, but let's set the table for people who are new or for people who might have forgotten in the intervening years. What is the fluoride lawsuit? Who brought it? When? Against whom? And what is it seeking to do?
So the lawsuit began as a petition to the EPA. It's called a citizen petition in November of 2016. and a range of a number of different consumer health, environmental health organizations brought the petition, as well as some moms, individual moms, on behalf of their children. And this petition was brought under a federal law called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, TSCA. And TSCA gives EPA the authority to ban the particular use of a chemical if that use presents an unreasonable risk to human health. And in our petition, we made the argument that adding fluoride to water, which is a particular use of fluoride, presents an unreasonable risk of neurotoxicity, of adverse effects on the brain, as manifested by IQ deficits, learning disorders, behavioral problems. And by that point, in November of 2016, we already had over 300 studies that had linked fluoride exposure to various types of neurotoxic outcomes, mostly in animals, but there was a considerable amount of human data at that time. Now, since we filed our petition, there has been a lot more data that has become available, and of particular importance in the lawsuit has been these birth cohort studies funded by the National Institutes of Health, NIH, here in the US. These studies were high-quality epidemiological studies of human populations in Canada and Mexico. And they looked at relatively low levels of fluoride among pregnant mothers as measured by the fluoride levels in their urine. And then they investigated to see whether that fluoride was associated with IQ deficits and other problems in their children later in life. And they found significant correlations. So those NIH studies became a sort of the focus of our lawsuit. But we filed this petition in November of 2016. The EPA denied it in February of 2017, and then we filed the lawsuit against the EPA in federal court in the Northern District of California in April of 2017.
So the lawsuit is specifically seeking the EPA to accept the petition, to do what specifically?
Right. So our petition was asking EPA to exercise its authority to ban the addition of fluoride to drinking water on the grounds that it presents a neurotoxic risk. EPA denied our petition. And then this law, the Toxic Substance Control Act, gives citizen groups the opportunity and the right to go to a federal court and make our case there. And what's really remarkable, James, about this statute is that typically when you are challenging a federal agency on a matter of a technical scientific matter, typically courts take a very deferential posture to the agency under the notion that, hey, they're the experts, we're just a court, who are we to say anything about the expert judgment of an agency? But TSCA has a very strong provision that Congress intentionally provided to where the court does not defer and cannot defer to the judgment of the EPA. The court must look at the evidence independent of the agency's assessment. So it was a remarkable opportunity to have the science vetted and assessed by someone with no skin in the game, no bias, right? And not with this, baggage of decades-long baggage of taking a position on the issue. So that was something that was always very attractive to me, was to be able to have a true independent forum look at this issue. And thus we brought the case.
Now, if I understand correctly, this is the first citizen-led TSCA case that has ever made it to federal court?
It's the first citizen petition to go to trial in federal court. There have been other cases where people have had their petitions denied. They file in federal court and either it's dismissed early on or whatever happens, Dave, no citizen has ever gotten to a full trial, which is what we were able to do in this case, not once, but twice. We've had 2 trials in this case.
Yes. Explain that. This is a crazy topsy-turvy case. So to tell us why there have been 2 trials in this case.
So we had our first trial after extensive expert discovery. We had our first trial in June of 2020 during the midst of the pandemic. And it was a trial by Zoom, actually, which worked out really well. And we presented extensive expert testimony, and EPA presented expert testimony. And at the end of the trial, the judge commented that we, the plaintiffs, had presented serious evidence that raises serious questions about the safety of fluoridation. And I'm sitting here right at the end of trial hearing the court saying that. And as you can imagine, I'm feeling pretty good at that point, right? But the court said, you know, as has been discussed at the trial, there is a pending review by the National Toxicology Program, which is a part of the Federal Health and Human Services. It's a federal agency, okay? There's this pending review by the NTP on fluoride neurotoxicity. And the judge stated that he thinks it's appropriate to wait to hear what the NTP has to say on this issue, since it's clearly on point and relevant to the issues in the case. And, you know, that was, I absolutely understood why the court would want that guidance from the NTP. It was frustrating for us because we felt we had met our burden. We had proved that there is a risk here from fluoridation, but nevertheless, the court wanted to get the guidance from the NTP. And so the court put the case on hold to await this final draft report from the NTP. And at that point, the thinking was, well, maybe this report comes out in a few months and we reconvene in a few months, right? But then it became like waiting for Godot. Month in, month came, month went, month came, month went, no NTP report. And we were 2 years out in 2020, in the summer of 2022. And that's when I got word from a person with knowledge that there was something amiss going on at the federal level and that there were political pressures keeping the NTP from publishing its final assessment, that the NTP had completed its review and had been ready and prepared to release the report, but it was put on hold for political reasons. And so then we went back to the court and said, we need to resume this case. We can't keep waiting for the final report.
So in your process of discovery and second trial regarding the holdup of this NTP report, what did you find out? What do you know for certain about what that NTP report did or did not contain?
We know a lot about what we were able, James, through discovery to access a full copy of that NTP, what was the final report from May of 2022, the final NTP assessment. We received a copy of it. Okay, so we know what it contains, and we also received extensive email correspondence across the federal agencies, which paint a very clear picture about why that report was not released.
And don't leave us hanging.
Right. So what the NTP, I'll start first with what the NTP report found and what they concluded. The NTP report, first off, is a systematic review. So they systematically reviewed the literature, the animal literature, as well as the human literature on fluoride and neurotoxic outcomes. And they principally focused on IQ, as that's where we have the most amount of data. And IQ is a standardized measurement that permits sort of analyses and comparisons across studies, because you have a standardized measurement by which to compare the results, okay? And the NTP found that there's a large body of studies on fluoride and IQ in human populations, that the studies are consistent in finding that higher fluoride exposure is associated with reductions in IQ, and that the kinds of things you look to interrogate whether the association is real or a mere artifact, that when you interrogate the data, there is no other apparent explanation for the association between fluoride and IQ deficits other than fluoride. By that, I mean, conceivably, you could have unmeasured differences in socioeconomic status or diet or other exposures to toxic chemicals or parental education, parental IQ. Those are the kinds of factors that you typically look to make sure, if you're studying a chemical on IQ, that you're really studying the effect of the chemical on IQ and not some of these other factors that affect IQ. And the NTP judged that based on the current data, those other factors are unlikely to explain the association between fluoride and reduced IQ. And so all of that, as you can imagine, was very helpful to our case. You know, here you have the NTP, which is the subject matter expert at the federal level for understanding the toxic effects of chemicals. And here they are saying, yes, there is compelling data linking fluoride to reduced IQ. And all of that was very important to our lawsuit in the second round. But the caveat there is that the NTP, they had their confidence in this association between fluoride and IQ was principally at higher exposure levels. So at and above 1.5 parts per million, which, not to get too wonky, but that's about 2 times the level of fluoride that we add to drinking water, okay? And so one of the issues in our case was, well, what do we make of that? How relevant is that to water fluoridation at 0.7 parts per million? And so in our second trial, we had extensive expert testimony on that very question.
All right, so the second trial took place earlier this year in February, if memory serves, or wrapped up in February. Tell us about the second trial and where where all of this stands at the moment.
Right. So the second trial featured testimony from the experts that the plaintiffs called, and some of the leading experts on matters of environmental epidemiology, including Philippe Grandjean, who published the research on mercury and IQ that the EPA based its safety standards for mercury on. Our testimony included, our evidence included testimony from Dr. Bruce Lanphier, who's done some of the seminal research on lead and IQ that the EPA has based safety standards for lead on, as well as testimony from Dr. Howard Hu, who's done extensive research on lead and IQ and other chemicals. And we also had testimony from Dr. Kathleen Thiessen, who is a co-author of the National Research Council's comprehensive review of fluoride toxicology from 2006, which you're probably familiar with. And she was one of the co-authors of that report. So we had testimony talking about the importance of the NTP report and how NTP's findings are strongly support the conclusion that water fluoridation presents an unreasonable risk of neurotoxic effects for a number of reasons, including this difference between 1.5 ppm and 0.7 is like razor thin. I mean, in the context of risk assessment, the way the EPA assesses the safety of other chemicals, that margin would never be considered acceptable. Never. There is no margin. And one of the reasons there's no margin, as the evidence showed, is that people in communities with 0.7 parts per million many people will drink more fluoride from water than people living at 1.5 ppm communities, because there's an overlap of exposure. Some people drink much more water than others. So just on that fact alone, there's a complete overlap of exposure. There's no margin, right? And then the evidence also showed that there's a significant range of vulnerability to fluoride's toxicity. Some people are going to be more vulnerable at lower doses than others. And given that inherent vulnerability that you see across that range of vulnerability, you need a much more than a margin of 2 to protect everyone in your population. Now, and if we take the view, James, that everyone should be able to drink water without being harmed, if we believe that, right? Like, public water should be a public good that doesn't harm people, then we should be enacting regulations that protect everybody in the population, not just most people, but everybody, right? And when you, like, one of the real themes of the case was comparing the data on fluoride and with the data on other chemicals that EPA has assessed where EPA has found a risk, and how we have much more data on fluoride at lower levels than EPA has with these other chemicals where EPA has found a risk. And so basically, I think the evidence showed in a very compelling way that EPA is holding and has held fluoride to a double standard for decades. That it's never been about the science. It's never been about true risk assessment. It's been about EPA following this policy of promoting fluoride for oral health purposes and not letting science get in the way.
This is it. And for people who want more background info on the development of water fluoridation, where it came from, why it came about, what it really has to do with, and no, it is not about some scientific medical procedure, which, oh, by the way, they are giving on the entire population from infants all the way up to elderly with absolutely no control whatsoever as to how much anyone is consuming. It'll all be good, don't worry. If people want to know how that crazy situation developed, again, I will exhort them to look back in my archives. I've talked about this over the years, and it is a point that I make over and over again. It is an uncontrolled medical treatment of sorts that, by the way, may have some unintended consequences. Anyway, it is insane. People who want more info on the twists and turns in the case, I will direct them to the work that Derek Burrows did for The Last American Vagabond on this subject. I'll put that link in the show notes. He interviewed yourself and other people involved in this second trial. He was there at the trial covering it, did some excellent work on that. So I'll direct them in that direction. But this is Solutions Watch, and I want to talk about the way forward and where we go from here. So the trial wrapped up in February. Great. Okay, so judgment any day now, right? Well, it's already June. Any sign that we may actually hear anything back from the judge regarding this?
Well, we certainly will be getting a ruling, and there's no set timeline for that. There's no statute or rule of law that says a court must make a decision in X number of days or weeks or months. So we don't know when that decision will be handed down. It could be any day. It could be today. It could be sometime this week. It could be but we just don't know. There's no way of knowing that. The court throughout this case has been very fair to both parties, has been very diligent in examining the evidence. And, I think, if anything, the length of time it has taken the court to render its decision and publish its opinion is a reflection of the care that the court has taken in really carefully considering all of the issues and arguments. And, we certainly, we're grateful for the court really listening to the evidence in a I think, very open-minded and careful way. And that's not always the case, as you know. So, but, certainly we're all keen to get the final decision. It's been a long time in the making. But your guess is as good as mine as to when that will come out.
All right. Now, obviously, as lead attorney, you don't want to speculate on what that decision will be. But using your experience, as you say, you have years and years of experience now taking these types of cases to court. What sorts of judgments have been rendered in the past? What specific things have been accomplished with some of the lawsuits you've been involved with?
Well, so with this case, this is a very unique case, the Tosca case. As we've discussed, there's never been a trial under Tosca like this before. So in that sense, there's no precedent to draw upon. There are examples of people using the citizen petition process and the EPA granting the petition and enacting certain regulatory relief. That has happened in the past, not very frequently, but it has happened. But in terms of the other work that I do, where I represent, like we talked about earlier, I represent people like families who the parents have worked in industries handling very toxic chemicals and have children with serious birth defects, permanent, profound, often catastrophic effects like nonverbal, pretty serious conditions. And, in those types of cases, what you're able to bring, you can't make them whole. You can't, really get them to where they would have been absent the injury, but you can bring financial relief, and that's what we seek to do, provide, you can either settle the case with the company or go to court and get a judgment, but there you're looking at financial relief. Here with the fluoride case, we're looking at, and this is one of the things that's so exciting about it, it's not just helping an individual family or an individual. We're working on, if we win, we will bring about a policy change that will result, hopefully, in water fluoridation being banned in the United States. And so that's what, for me, is most exciting about this case, is to be able to use, to bring to bear the latest, most reliable science and then bring it into a forum where you can actually affect policy.
I am just thinking about this at the moment, but I have covered before in Roundup Products liability litigation, which I never thought of it, but that was actually also tried in the United States District Court, Northern District of California, exactly as this one. Do you know, is that the same judge in that case, or?
No, it's not the same judge. But you're right, it's the same district court. And yeah, the cases against Roundup there have been some very large jury verdicts against Monsanto. I think, some very large jury verdicts. And it's really, as a lawyer, it's really amazing to be able to go before a jury and to be able to present the evidence to a jury, and it's a really amazing thing, because you have this opportunity without media, without narrative management, right? Without the sources of narrative control in society lose their force, and you have the rules of evidence apply, right? And you have, and it's an ability to, it's a truth finding mission. At its best, litigation allows us to get to the truth of the matter. The crucible of cross-examination, right? People have a lot of opinions. They can say a lot of things. You get up on the stand and being subject to the crucible of cross-examination, and it's a way of vetting, like making sure that there's actual merit to what you're saying. And I think that, if through in the fluoride case, we showed that there's a lot of substance here. It's not just a lot of opinions. There's a lot of substance to this concern about fluoride neurotoxicity. Our experts are on the stand for hours and hours and hours being grilled. And I think that our evidence came through and stood the test.
All right. Again, this is an incredibly important case, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing the decision. One way or another, it will at least be interesting to see what is gavelled down here. But I know there are a lot of people in the audience who are concerned and interested about this and want it to be involved in this in some way. Taking off your lawyer's hat for a moment, what would you suggest for people out there who are concerned about this issue in order to A, inform themselves, and B, become active on this issue?
Yeah, well, there's a website, a Fluoride Action Network website, which is fluoridealert.org, fluorideaction.net. I always hesitant, by the way, James, when I give that website URL, fluoridealert.org. And here's why. Shortly after we created that website, the American Dental Association bought fluoridealert.com. And they now direct people back to the ADA's website. So, when I say fluoridealert.org, I say it sort of tentatively with apprehension because so many people end up doing fluoridealert.com and then they go to the American Dental Association website. The ADA, of course, is a trade association that has been promoting fluoridation for decades. But nevertheless, Fluoride Action Network, which is an organization I helped found with my father and mom back in 2000, it's an organization that compiles a lot of information on fluoride that I think is helpful for people who want to learn about the issue, provides basic information as well as more detailed information. I kind of think about the website a little bit like a ski map, where you have the green trails, the blue trails, and the double diamonds, the black diamonds, right? So depending on what your interest level is and knowledge level is, I think FAN caters to all knowledge, people with different levels of knowledge. But in terms of what people can, so that's one, people can learn about the issue through the Fluoride Action Network. But in terms of what to do, I think that I always like to say that, this is in part, what is your passion? What do you like to do in life? And then that will help inform how you might be able to contribute to this issue, right? And it's like an ecosystem with people with different niches. And, ultimately, I think to be effective and, successful in what you do, it's finding something that you enjoy doing or have an ability to do, and then sort of providing that, a contribution along those lines. But I certainly think that it's important for people to find out, does your community add fluoride to the water? Not every community does. And if your community does add fluoride to the water, then you might consider trying to raise the issue with your local town council or city council. Go and provide some comments at one of the upcoming meetings, or share some of the information with some of the city councilors or your neighbors. Just start to share some of the information with others and see where it goes. There's no harm in sharing some information, and then if you get some traction, go with it and keep going with it. And the one of the really satisfying things about the fluoride issue is that, as there's some political issues that are so big and large, it's very hard to have an effect, right? We can sit there and consume the news and watch it and have and be outraged at what's happening and feel like we can't influence it, right? with fluoride, since it's a locally decided issue in many situations, sometimes it's a statewide mandate and that makes things harder. But when it's a locally decided issue, we've had hundreds of situations where communities have successfully worked to remove fluoride from their water. And it's a tangible victory for justice that can be done. And I think that's hopefully something that will inspire people, because it's something that you can actually do. Now, the larger the city, the larger the community, the harder it becomes. But especially for smaller towns, there's an opportunity there to bring about positive change.
As a born and bred Calgarian, I can attest to the fact that, yes, this is a local issue that can and is affected by the back and forth of local politics, in which people really do have a say, sometimes in the right direction, sometimes in the wrong direction, as in the case with Calgary. So yes, absolutely. All right, an incredibly important issue, lots of information on the table. There will be lots of resources in the show notes for this conversation, but one that I want to direct people to finally here is the fact that people in the Dallas area will get the chance to hear you speak in person this coming Sunday, June 23rd, at the Angelica Film Center. I will include the link for more information on this, but as I understand this, this will be a screening of the documentary Fluoride on Trial, the censored science on fluoride and your health, and will involve a conversation between you and Mary Holland. Tell us about this event.
Yes, well, it's this Sunday in Dallas, as you noted. It starts at 5 o'clock, and we will start by showing the film, which was released earlier this year by Children's Health Defense. And then the film is about an hour long, and then afterwards there's going to be a Q&A, so I'll be answering any and all questions that people have.
All right, excellent. Well, as I say, the link to that will be in the show notes for people who are interested. It's at ministryoftruthfilmfest.com. I hope people, Corbett reporters in the Dallas area, will be able to make it there. Having said all of that, lots of information here, so I hope people will, who are interested and motivated, will, as you say, use your skills, your abilities, your passion, whatever it is that you can do to make your influence on this issue or any issue that you care about. And I think that is the overall message of the Solutions Watch series. So Michael Connett, thank you for your time and expertise today. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the results of this case.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the opportunity.